computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello, Sci-Fi Snackers, and welcome to episode 20 of Sci-Fi Snacks. I am so excited that you are here with me this week to chat about this short story called The Life Cycle of a Cyber Bar. This story is probably one of my favorites so far this season because it was just so unexpected. And you all know I love a good title, and The Life Cycle of a Cyber Bar has that perfect amount of intrigue to it where I'm like, how does a bar have a life cycle? What makes a cyber bar different from a regular bar? So I was super excited to dive on in. Now, this story is a little more recent than last week's. Last week, we talked about a story from the 90s, throwback. This one, it comes from September 2021, and it was featured in the Future Science Fiction Digest magazine online. There's a link to it, like always, in the show notes if you want to check that out. Now, this story is only 4,320 words, so it's like that perfect short story size. I really think that this is kind of a sweet spot, especially for a lot of things that you read online, is that 4,000 to 5,000 word range. It's probably pretty similar to the size short story we read in high school, where it gets a really interesting story arc and it ties it up, but it's not too much, it's not too little. It kind of just feels like a short story. So I really like that. This one is, if I didn't mention it already or you didn't guess from the title, it is a cyberpunk story. So we talked about cyberpunk in a different story earlier this season. So if you go and check out episode 17, Cyberpunk Coffee Machine Robots, where we talked about a notorious intergalactic criminal, that was the same subgenre as this one here. So we can kind of talk about a little bit how they compare and how they're similar, how they're different. I think that's pretty interesting. And for our last episode of this season, we will be talking about a cyberpunk novel, Snow Crash. Some people do classify it as post-cyberpunk because it kind of goes into satire. So we can kind of see how these all kind of work together and play in the same sandbox of cyberpunk. If you do not remember, the definition of cyberpunk is a genre of science fiction set in a lawless subculture of an oppressive society dominated by computer technology. So the cyber part is really important, and the punk part comes from kind of this oppressive society and that kind of alt feel to the story. So The Life Cycle of a Cyber Bar was written by Arthur Liu and translated by Nathan Ferries. This was originally written in Chinese. I read it in English. Arthur Liu is a Chinese SFF writer and translator based in Beijing. His works have been published in Science Fiction World, Non-Exist, and SF Stave, among other Chinese science fiction magazines. As a computer engineer, he founded the Chinese Science Fiction Database, serving as its chief administrator. He wishes to be a cyber crawler. And then our translator, Nathan Ferries, teaches Chinese language and literature at Bates College in Maine. Someday, I want to do a survey of all of the science fiction writers and what their day jobs are because, well, newsflash to anybody who doesn't know, most writers have a day job, and I feel like a disproportionate amount of science fiction writers are engineers or coders or these just like tech guys and not necessarily scientists. Like the scientists themselves are not dabbling in the writing world, I don't think as much, but I have met so many coders and engineers and people like that who write science fiction. And I just think it's fascinating. Like, obviously, it goes hand in hand. You know, you're working with technology, you're thinking creatively in your job, and, you know, what if we do this to solve this problem? And it's only like the logical next step if you want a creative outlet like writing science fiction. You probably read a lot of it growing up. But I just think it's interesting, like, what writers do for their day jobs and how they fall into the genres that they do. Probably one of the most famous examples of an engineer tech guy is Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian. He was, you know, he self-published that while he was working his day job and all of that. And then it blew up, and he's the one in a million story where now he does creative writing full time. But I just think it's fascinating. And so we've got another one here. Now, this week for our snack, I decided that I wanted a bar snack, and this is where I kind of went off the rails. Obvious bar snack, get the bar mix, get with the Chex and the pretzels and the peanuts and that, or get like a nut mix or something, like all of these standard snacks that I know I like. I could have done that. And I was like, oh, that's boring. Nobody wants to hear about how I like mixed nuts. Like, you know, that doesn't make good content, right? So I was like, I'm going to try something that I've never had before. And so I bought a bag of pork rinds because for me, I was like, yeah, you totally like, I associate pork rinds, rightly or not, with a certain demographic of middle-aged man in bar. And yeah, or like watching football with the dudes at the bar, and the bar's kind of dirty, and I don't know, like I don't know where this came from, but I was like, yes, I'm gonna eat pork rinds and I'm gonna love them. I don't know why I thought I was gonna love them. I opened this bag and my 5-year-old was there and he wanted them. He practically climbed to the top of my desk where I hide the snacks for the podcast because I have 2 kids, and if I don't hide the snacks, I will not have them. He climbed the desk and was like, I want those. I opened this bag and it smelled so bad. He didn't want them anymore. I took one bite and I will admit it didn't taste terrible. Like it was kind of like a hint of pork in a corn chip with the consistency of a cheese puff. But it was not enjoyable. I couldn't get over the smell. The actual pork rind itself, like on its own, didn't really smell too bad, but I was just so off-put opening it, and yeah, it was not great. So I did, however, find another snack. So this is our bonus snack. Sometimes, like last week, I need to read multiple stories to get it right. Well, this week I needed multiple snacks to get it right because I did not want 2 weeks in a row where I was like, feeling bummed about my snack, because that's like 50% of the podcast, right? Sci-Fi snacks. So I decided I needed another unique bar snack that I had not had before. I went on a road trip to DC last weekend to see the Taylor Swift movie album release in theaters. That's not really relevant, but what makes it relevant is that on the way is a Buckee's. And if you don't know what Buckee's is, you need to pause the podcast for a second because this is important. You need to look up what a Buckee's gas station is and then come back. Okay? All right. So you're back. You have seen that Buckee's is this wild place. It's like a gas station on steroids, and it has a million things. It has all these snacks, and I found these really cool ranch flavored oyster crackers. They have like 3 or 4 different flavor options. I went with ranch because I was feeling a little risk averse, and I know I like ranch, and they were fabulous. So good. And so yeah, that's where we were at with our snack. Let's get into the story. The Life Cycle of a Cyber Bar is a story in 6 parts. It starts and it's got the little tag of 1. And immediately I'm like, this is cool. I love stories that are structured like this. So we're talking life cycle. All right, we're getting parts. In part 1, it starts with, so a guy goes into a bar and orders a drink. And honestly, it could be considered a cliche first line, but I loved that choice because I had the feeling we were going to subvert things. And especially because of the subgenre itself, like cyberpunk, I knew this wasn't just like a Western, a guy walks into a bar. And so I was excited. As we continue, we get this kind of removed third person type story where it's clearly like a narrator, but it's a little removed, but we're with this guy who goes into the bar. He gets his drink. The bartender slides the tequila down the bar to him. It's all very leaning into this cliche. And then the guy buys some illicit body modification chip things from this other shady guy at the bar. And then another patron comes over. He tells him, hey, buy me a drink. Like, clearly he sees this guy has money. And our main character is like, no, F off, basically. I don't think it actually swears, but that was the vibe. Like, absolutely not. I will not be buying you a drink. And then all of a sudden, shots ring out everywhere. They're like bullet holes throughout everything. And like everybody's dying. The bartender gets shot and falls down. And then all of a sudden, like, it's quiet. And then the bartender crawls out from behind the bar to start cleaning everything up. End of section 1. And you're like, oh, okay. Where's it going to go from there? Because that was kind of, like I said, it was kind of a cliche like story and setup. So, and it's like, this is the typical day in the life cycle of a cyber bar, which didn't fully make sense yet. So I was interested to keep reading. Now we're into part 2. It starts out, it's from the point of view of the bartender, and it's the exact same story. So some cute like little insights from the change in point of view. And I thought that was cool. We realized that like the bartender almost died, but like the bartender's got some sort of like nanobites from her boss or whatever that heal her. And that's why she crawls out from behind the bar at the end and starts to clean up. End of part 2 when we get through that story. Now part 3. This is where I knew in the story that this author was smart. I was locked in 100%. We break the fourth wall. The narrator breaks the fourth wall and is basically like, psych, you thought that this was going to be from the point of view of somebody else. Like who? Maybe the guy in the trench coat? Maybe like the mean Scarface guy? Like who's it going to be? Because author has established the convention that in different parts we're in different points of view. And then the rule of 3, like number 3 is the switch up. We find out that we are going to go through this part from the point of view of the tequila. The tequila in the glass slid across the bar to the guy. It goes in the guy's body. The guy gets shot. The tequila starts to like ooze out of his body. This is where stuff gets weird. But like, I'm super into it at this point. And so we get to the end and the tequila is like, I'm like stuck in the cracks in the floor and the bartender can't really clean me up. And this is where we're at. This is the typical day in the life cycle of a cyber bar. You know, we get that closing again. They also have this like repeated theme of like the rats outside. So we get that, or we get the tagline about the life cycle of the bar. And then we go into part 4. So you're like, okay, we've had from the main character, from who's not really the main character because we left him. And then we had the bartender point of view. Then we had the weird tequila point of view. What possibly could be next? So next is kind of a break from the convention. And this is the section that goes into backstory and weird science and everything you could ever want to know or not want to know about this cyber bar. And the fact that the cyber bar is actually like a sentient living thing. You know, they came from Earth and they blended in and then they went elsewhere in the universe. And it's weird. It's weird, but like good weird. We talked a couple weeks ago about good weird and bad weird. This story was 100% good weird. So that's part 4. We touch very lightly on that cycle of the story, but only very lightly. We don't get that play by play so that it doesn't feel like it drags. All of a sudden we're getting like an info dump without getting an info dump in part 4. Now, part 5 is from the point of view of the bar itself. And in this part, it takes us beyond the story of that just small interaction in the day in the life of the bar. And at that part, we see that the bar, because it's sentient, it has goals. And the bar talks about it has 3 goals in life. The first goal was to be the last living cyber bar, which it has achieved. It also has a goal of being the first bar in man. So there's the whole a man walks into a bar. Well, the bar wants to be in a man. So we're starting this weird word play. So the bar comes up with this plan. And essentially, the bar has been observing different things and figuring it out. And the bar decides, I need to be in an amusement park. And the bar is like, I'm too big to like go into a man, but I can like weirdly change my body, my presentation of myself, and look like a candy house. So immediately I'm like, Hansel and Gretel? This is the witch gingerbread house? I don't know. It's a bar made of candy now. We get these random teenage boys who are causing problems at the amusement park. And they realize like they can eat this candy house. And they're like, what? This is awesome. And so they eat the candy walls and different things. And they can't finish it because they're too small or whatever. But the bar is like freaking out. The bar is like, this is amazing. Like I am the first bar in man, which was the goal. But then the boys walk out of the bar and they drop dead like immediately. Like as soon as they are over the threshold of the bar, after they've ingested the bar, they like can't be separate. They're dead. They're these like cocooned dead bodies. And the bar's like, ooh, this might cause some problems. Like I don't think anybody's coming and looking for these misbehaving boys, but also like, this is not good. And that brings us to part 6, which is the final part of the story, where the bar goes into a bar. And we're still in this weird amusement park place, but the bar decides, okay, I can't look like a candy house. That caused too many problems. So I'm going to go back to like looking like a bar. So it looks like a bar. But then accidentally like duplicated itself. And so there are 2 bars. It's the bodies of the boys did this. So like the dead bodies all clumped together. And then they couldn't mesh with the old bar, but instead they meshed together and created a second bar. So kind of like cellular mitosis type thing. I don't know. So like now we have 2 bars and the bar is stoked. The bar's like, what? I reproduced. This was crazy. And so there are 2 bars and they're looking at each other. And then we get the replay of a man walks into a bar. And the fight happens again. And this time, when the bullets start ringing out, they go into the walls, but some of the bullets take pieces of the one bar and shoot them into the other bar. So they're like, a bar goes into a bar. And it's all very sexualized at this point. Like the innuendo is, it's through the roof. Like you just got to read it. It is full of that. The bar essentially goes out and seeds the universe and realizes it's not going to be the last bar anymore. Its story isn't over. And that's how it colonizes the rest of the galaxy or the universe or whatever. And that's the end of the story. It was a wild ride, but I was super into it. This is a good one and short too. What I really just loved about the story was how freaking clever it was. Every time I thought I knew where we were going, like that breaking the fourth wall of the third point of view, it literally was like calling it out. It was like, hey, so you thought I was going to do this thing, right? Wrong. And I love that. I'm not always, I can't figure out when I'm reading stories and it's like a murder mystery, I never never figure it out until the author wants me to. You know how you figure it out like half a page before because they finally give you that last little piece of information and it all comes together? That's when I know. So when I'm reading a story like this and I think I'm being clever and all of a sudden the author pulls a little like, you thought you knew, but you didn't, and like actually calls that out on the page in such a voicey, like bold way. I love that. That's so like, that's why I read. Like, I don't want to read something that I know what the experience is going to be. I know a lot of people love to rewatch and they have comfort watches because, you know, like a TV show that they know everything. They could recite every word. My brain just doesn't love that. So often I'm like, I would rather have something completely new that feels like the old thing, but I don't know anything, which is hard to get sometimes, but it's just how my brain reacts. So I love when stories like this smash convention and feel clever and fresh and new and just trick me. I love to be tricked. I want to be duped. I want you to be smarter than me and be clever. And I love it. So that was probably my favorite part. I'm going to think about that. I literally stopped reading and was like, I have to share this with my husband because I was like, this is so good. They got me. Like, so funny. One of the things I also think that this story did really well with was it provided a lot of information and a lot of weird information because like the rules of this world were very different from the rules of our world. And it did it in a way that it wasn't an info dump, but it also kind of was, but it was also like a really entertaining one. And it wasn't all up front. It was in section, part 4. So we're talking like 60% of the way through this story, we get all the backstory. But we need it at that point to understand the final 2 pieces. And so I thought it did it really well. And it didn't give us anything more in the early parts. It was like, just take this weird ride with me. So I thought that was really cool. And I think that just overall, this story is going to be one that sticks with me because it has a really cool hook of, you know, like sentient cyber bar in 6 parts. But it goes really deep too. It's not just the surface level hook. I think you see a lot if you've ever done like pitch events online where people will pitch their stories. And I've been burned by this where it's like you get a pitch and you're like, wow, that's really cool. Like that's got such a good hook to it. And then you read the book because you're like, wow, that was really great. And there isn't much beyond the hook. Like, it's not that they lied, like that's the story, but it doesn't develop, it doesn't deepen. They had their one like really cool, clever thing, and then the rest kind of falls flat. And I feel like the story did the opposite of that. It was this really cool hook, but also it gave me a lot that I didn't expect. So it was delightful in that way. And I think that made me really think about what I learned. And it can be tough week after week being like, oh, what did I learn from this? When in reality, I'm reading for entertainment. But I do a reread or I look back at it with kind of a more critical eye because I do want to learn. That's part of this project for me, is learning and then sharing with you about how these stories are doing the things they do. So like, why is this story so delightful? Like, what did they do? What did the author do on the page with the words? We all have the same words to work with. In this one, I was going to say we all have the same 26 characters, but like it was written in Chinese, so they have totally different characters, which that's a whole nother conversation, is how translations work and things like that. Like, if you have podcast recommendations for me about like translation work, I have a good working knowledge of like French, and I've studied French literature in French. And I did a translation project for like my senior year of high school where I took a French epic poem and then translated it and then created a children's book. So like I've dabbled in translation, and there's a lot of thought that has to go into that because things aren't one for one in translation. Language works differently in different languages. Surprise. So I would be really interested to know like how this story reads in the original. I don't think I have the skills to learn Mandarin right now to figure that out, but that would be really cool. But one of the things I learned here is that in this structure of this story, which was kind of a, if you read enough short stories, there are enough short stories that section out like this, where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 5-act structure, 4-act structure, 3-act structure, whatever kind of thing that they're going for. And this story subverted that. So just thinking about these conventions that authors use and how can I use them differently? And there's a phrase, I'm not quite sure where it came from, but it's, people will say if there's something weird in your story or something that doesn't feel realistic, all you need to do is like call attention to it. They say put a lampshade on it. You have this story where you've got a bar that's a living organism, right? So like that's weird. We don't shy away from the weird. We lean in. We're like, hey, this is weird, right? The tequila section is where that really happened, where the tequila called out, this is weird, right? This is a funny story of this bar that's actually a living thing. And like, it kind of held your hand as you figured out what was going on in this world. So it did that. It hung the lampshade on the ideas that were just creating questions. So it's the author is acknowledging, hey, this is different. This is weird. We'll get to it later. But it calms you. It allows you to wait till part 4 to get all the backstory and to kind of like understand. Novice writers will sometimes put everything up front because like, oh, you need to know that this bar is alive and this is how it reproduces and it grows and then it collapses every night and it reabsorbs people and it's eating by like killing these weird men that come in and cause trouble. And all of the other people are just like extensions of the bar. They're not real. And a novice writer might think, well, you need to know all that. And the reality is you don't. You just need to know that the author will take care of you. And so this story did a great job of easing you into the weird and just being like, oh yeah, this thing. That was interesting, huh? So I thought that was something I could take in my own writing and really trusting the audience and thinking about, what is the bare minimum that they need to know? And can they wait? And are there times where it's appropriate? Science fiction readers, we love that kind of stuff. Like I love a good info dump that's exciting and interesting, that adds depth to a world. Like I have much higher tolerance for that kind of thing than say like a contemporary romance reader. That's not to say one is better than the other. Like don't go there. But the idea is what I'm looking for when I'm reading is that science, is that technology. And like with this author, he's a computer engineer. He's going to know weird stuff. He's going to know like how things get put together. And so it's just like, it's interesting stuff. So there's a little more tolerance in science fiction to give us those behind the scenes things, as opposed to, like I said, like a contemporary romance. Like I don't need to know how the coffee machines work at the coffee shop where the meet cute happens. Like nobody needs that. We just need to know that like, oh, my latte was too hot and I spilled it and now I have to take off my shirt and look all sexy. I don't know. Like, it's so much less about that kind of thing in other genres, but this was cool. I also thought this was a great example of how to break the fourth wall and make it feel so natural. Like each of these sections was so different in terms of like point of view and what they were trying to do and how they sounded and how they felt. But none of it felt out of place. And I don't know if that's because it was all just weird, it was like different shades of that. But it did such a good job of shifting gears and being like, here's a brand new point of view. And it was telling the same story over and over and over again, but not in a boring way. And I think that's the real challenge of a story like this. There are novels where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to have a crime happen, and then we're going to have 7 different points of view of the same crime. And the challenge is, how do you do the same thing 7 times without boring your reader? And it's by having a different voice, having, different pieces of information. What do you zoom in on? What do you zoom out on? What does this add to what we already know? And I think that this story did a beautiful job of looking at things from a different angle and evolving the story. Like, we still got that same cycle again and again, but like, we took it further. The bar had goals. The bar had a super objective. So it did such a good job. And, I think I thought Cyberpunk would be a lot darker when I started this series. So one of the definitive texts that everyone talks about when you mention Cyberpunk is Neuromancer. And I started reading Neuromancer and I just, I couldn't get into it. I could see the vibe, I could see what it was doing, but sometimes for me as a reader, I think you read stuff that was probably really, really revolutionary at the time when it was written, that now feels, because it's been iterated on so many times and innovated, and it just feels of its time in a not good way. In a way that I'm like, okay, I don't want to spend those precious hours of my life reading a story where there are no women in it, or the only women are props or moms, like, that have no agency. Like, that's not for me. So I came into the idea of Cyberpunk as that. And the 2 stories that I've read so far, outside of the portion of Neuromancer that I read, have been like the complete opposite. So they're like the modern iterations of Cyberpunk. The other one was the coffee machine episode. We had this weird robot. They were both very weird. So I think I like weird cyberpunk and not cyberpunk that takes itself really seriously. That's my brainwave for this episode, is my flavor of cyberpunk is weird. Let me know if you've read other weird cyberpunk and what you thought of it. Or do you like the gritty, dark cyberpunk that I did not like? I want to know. I was a little sad at the end of this story. Always, whenever they have food in a story and it's not the food that I picked for my snack, I always feel like it's a little bit of a lost opportunity. Like, how cool would a gingerbread house be? And it's almost that season. And who knows, whenever you're listening to this, maybe it is the Christmas season. I bet you could go out and get a gingerbread house and like make it and do candy. And then you could eat a gingerbread house while reading this story, and that would be super fun. And if you do that, like, take pictures and tag me on social media. Show me your experience of reading the life cycle of a cyber bar while eating your gingerbread house bar thing. I would be stoked. Like, it would make my whole year. I'm not even kidding. I wasn't sure how my fake bar snacks would relate, but then I thought about it and I was like, you know what? If there was a sentient gas station or building or bar on this planet, Buckee's would be in contention. It's a weird place. I don't know. It's hard to explain. The first time I ever went to one, it was actually on a recommended list of places to go when I went to a friend's destination wedding in Texas. I say destination wedding, like they lived there. But they were like, hey, while you're here, check out these spots. And they just listed Buckee's and they were like, trust us, don't Google it, just go. And yeah, if there were ever to be a weird, sentient, slightly hostile, but also like trying to draw you in type building on this planet, Buckee's would be the one that I would guess. And now we all know that I never guess right, but Buckee's would be my guess. I think it does a great job of pulling people in, and who knows, like, you could lose somebody in Buckee's and you would never know. The place is so big. You can go in and never come out. All right, we have chatted far too much today, but I had a great time talking this week. Next week's story is The Spiral Ranch. It is another solar punk story, so we get to compare that one as well. Links are in the show notes as always. Reach out on social media. Come say hi. Tell me what your thoughts were on this weird little story. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week. Bye.